Hi, and thanks for joining me today. In this video, I am going to just do a really quick tutorial on how to kind of make your own custom stepper card. So this is going to be a top folding card that will fold down nicely and stand up with 3 steps on one side and a nice kind of main focal panel on the other. So there's lots of different ways of doing this, I'm sure. I sort of was always mystified by how these folks who do tutorials on YouTube that I've seen anyways, how they figure out all the measurements, because usually they just tell you the measurements for the size card that they are making, but I haven't heard anyone really explain how you were to figure that all out for yourself if you wanted to create a card that was a different size or to create steps in a different way. And so I thought that I would go ahead and put this video together because I found it helpful just for myself to figure this out and sort of demystify it for myself so that I can apply the same look and technique but to different size cards, and maybe even change it up a little bit just depending on the look that I was going for. So let me bring out this panel that I've already started working on, but I'm going to actually kind of talk through everything, and like I said, there's probably loads other ways of doing this, so if you have a technique that you use that works best for you, then definitely stick to that. But if you're curious to figure out how to do this for yourself and apply it to other card sizes, then maybe give this a try and see if it works for you. So what I have here folds down to a standard US A2 size, so it's going to be 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, and it'll be top folding landscape. So that way we have a little bit of extra room to play with and have that divide between our main panel, what I'm calling the main panel, which is this flat panel here, and the steps. So how I start off is I just create I just cut myself a regular card base, how I would normally start an A2 size card. So I will write down the measurements as I go if you wanted to create this exact style, but I'll also tell you how I did the math to figure out the steps. That way you can always change that up for yourself. So I start with 8 1/2 by 5 1/2. So 8 1/2 by 5 1/2. The next thing I do is I just figure out how wide do I want my main panel to be versus how wide do I want my steps to be. So in this case, we have a total of 5 1/2 inches to play with. And so I just went ahead and made the determination that I want my main panel to be 3 inches wide and my steps to be a little bit more narrow, so these will be 2 1/2. So the first thing I do is give myself a mark at 3 inches, and then I like to use a T ruler because that way you know everything is nice and square. And then I draw a line down the length of my paper at that 3-inch mark so that I know where the dividing line between my main panel and my steps are going to be. So 3-inch is what my main panel, the width of my main panel. Now we're going to do some scoring. So bring out my scoreboard, and the first score line I'm going to make is I'm going to put the 8 1/2 along the top, and I'm going to score my main panel first. I'm going to score on that side first. So basically we're going to score this line right here. So that's just going to be half the length of the cardstock, basically our standard score line. So that'll be at 4 1/4, but I'm only going to take that score line to the line that we drew. So just down 3 inches. So as you can see, that's just going to go, this is where our line that we drew was. So I'm just scoring that length right there. Okay, the next thing that I determine is how tall do I want my steps to be? In total, we've got 4 1/4 to work with, and I wanted my steps to be a little higher than the halfway point. So in this case, what I used was, let me just measure it, 2 3/4. So this is 3 inches is the width of my main panel. 2 3/4 is the height of my steps, of the tallest step. So essentially, if I look at my stepper card from the side here, 2 3/4 is going to be from the bottom of the card to the top. So this right here, where my 2 fingers are, that's 2 3/4. So my next score line is actually going to be this one right here. So the topmost step, essentially. So we want to turn our card around so that it's still 8 1/2 inches across the top, but this time you're scoring on the side of where your steps are. And so I drew that line at the 3 inch mark so that it's going to be really obvious, because our main panel is 3 inches wide, meaning our steps are 2 1/2 inches wide. So now we've got one panel that's going to be more narrow than the other, so it's more obvious which side is our steps and which side is our main panel. So with our steps at the top, along the 8 1/2 inch length of your cardstock, you want to make that score line at, in my case, 2 3/4, or whatever the height of what you decide you want your steps to be. And again, I'm only scoring down until I hit the line that we drew. So essentially, I've just scored this line here, the top of my steps. So here's where the math comes in. Now you've got sort of the rest of your steps that you need to score lines for, but how do you determine where to score the top of your next 2 steps and the bottoms of those steps? So the math for it actually works out to be pretty simple. So here's how I determine it. Maybe there's even more simple ways of doing it. But basically, if I fold this out, what we have is the length that is remaining for the front of your steps. All of that needs to fold down nice and neatly so that it matches the height of your tallest step. So you see how all that folds down? Everything meets up. It'll all fold down, fit in an envelope, and get sent easily. So whatever length this ends up being, once it's folded down, it needs to equal the height of your steps, which is, in my case, I've decided is 2 3/4. So just so that we have some words to kind of talk about this, I am going to consider this, or refer to this as, the visible portion of my steps. So basically, it's just what you can see, not what gets folded underneath. So this is going to be the visible portion of my steps. So what's visible needs to equal 2 3/4. Now, just so that we have a way to refer to these portions, I'm going to call these portions the hidden portion of my steps. So those are the folds that get folded behind and are not seen. So that's why I'm going to refer to those as the hidden portion. So all of that folds down. Now, how do you determine, what, where to score? So let's start with the visible portion. You can kind of make this determination of where your steps fall however you like, as long as the visible portion equals 2 3/4. So the way that I like to think about it is I like to determine, okay, well, how far up do I want that first step? And so in this case, I decided my first step was going to be at 1.5. Then I think about, well, okay, so then between the second step and the third step, do I want the steps to be equal? Do I want them to kind of increase? How do I want that to look? So in this case, I was playing with the idea of making the portion in between each step actually increase. So I decided, well, this is going to be 1.5. My next step is going to be 1/2 inch from the top there in terms of what's visible. So that'll take me to 2 inches. And then what's left is 2 3/4. So that's going to be my final step, the visible portion of my final step. So there I have it. I've determined, essentially how I'm going to arrive at each level of my steps. Then we need to figure out, all right, once we know that, how do we determine where to score these for these valleys where it's hidden, where your steps are hidden? So to determine that, what I do is I take the length that is remaining. So the total length of our card is 8.5. I'm going to do some scratch math on this side. So we've got 8.5 is our total. Then we've got, we want to kind of take out this portion that we already scored for, because this is the back of our steps. So we just want the length that we're working with for the front portion of our steps. So you can either measure that with a ruler or you can do the math. But if you're going to do the math, basically you subtract out 2 3/4. Either way, what you should arrive at is 5 3/4 of an inch. So we've got 5 3/4 of an inch of paper that we're working with, but once it's all folded down, the visible portion should only be 2 3/4. So if I take 2 3/4 away from that, I end up with 3 inches. So basically there's 3 inches of cardstock that's hidden. That's going to make up our hidden portion. All right. So then let's look a little bit more closely at what is actually getting covered up. So if I just concentrate on this first fold here, that's the top of my first step. I fold that down. What's hidden is this, and then to come back up again, that same amount is hidden. Now if I look at my next step, it's the exact same thing. From the top of the step, it goes down, that's all hidden, has to come back up to the top, so that's hidden too. So basically, we've got 4 sections of cardstock that are hidden. So I take this number 3 here, that's the length of cardstock that's hidden from the front, and I just divide that by 4. And that's going to give me each of those segments that's hidden, which in this case ends up being 3/4 of an inch. So now I have determined, the sections that get hidden, and then I determined that the height of my steps were going to be at the first step was going to be 1.5, and then I was going to go 1/2 inch up from there, and then I was going to go 3.25 inches up from there. Okay, so now let's start scoring. So we still have our paper that's 8.5 inches across. We scored the backside at 2 3/4, which is the height of our steps. We said the first step, bring my scratch paper here. We said our first step was going to be 1.5 inches up. So from this left edge, I'm going to go in by 1.5 inches. So that's going to take me to 7. Then now we need to score. So I've just scored this line right here, our first step from the front. Now I need to score this line right here, which is our first valley. So we just determined that each of those segments in the valley is 3/4 of an inch. So I'm going to go 3/4 of an inch, and I'm going to put a score line. Again, only scoring until I hit the line. And on that line, I'm actually going to flip it over and score from the back, because usually when you fold your score lines, you want to fold them as mountain folds. So that maintains the integrity of your card. So now I've scored this valley line right here. So then we need to score this line. Well, to get that line, we need to come back up the hidden, the height of the hidden portion, so that's 3/4 of an inch. We said we wanted the visible portion on that step to be 1/2 inch, so I'm going to go up 1/2 inch beyond that. So 3/4 of an inch plus 1/2 inch is 1.25 inch. So I'm going to score from the line that I left off at. I'm going to score 1.25 inch from there. So give that a score until I hit the line. Then we need to score this right here, this valley. And again, we've determined that each segment that's hidden is 3/4 of an inch. So I'm going to score 3/4 of an inch from the line that I left off at. So give that a score. And because that's a valley, but usually if you want to keep your cardstock strong, you want to actually score on the opposite side. So you get that final score line in. So that's this right here. So that's all the scoring that we need to do. Now we need to actually do a little bit of cutting. So you can see here, there's a slit that detaches your main panel from your steps. Basically, all you need to do is cut on the line that you drew, and you go from one end to the other on the side that you made your score lines for your steps. So just go from one score line on one end all the way to the other end and stop at the last score line. So you can use, if you have one of those rotary trimmers that's on a track, you can kind of drop your blade in at one score line and then run it down your track to the other score line, or you can use a metal ruler, and I just use a utility knife from the hardware store, and I've already made my cut. So so then you make your cut like that. See? So now all you have to do is fold. So anywhere that's sort of got a little trench or an embossed line where it's dented inwards, you want to fold that as a mountain fold. So just get that fold in. This is a mountain fold. This is a mountain fold. And I'm using a 120-pound cardstock, so I'm gonna sort of be gentle as I do this. Although, before everything's really folded, let me go ahead and erase the pencil line that I've got here. Okay. So, all of your embossed score lines, go ahead and mountain fold those. Then I'm going to flip it over, because remember those trenches, those valleys, we scored on the back side so that we can put those as mountain folds from the back. Then you can start to just close everything down, and then once you've got it all folded, definitely give everything a really good burnish so that it lays nice and flat for you. So just gonna burnish each of these folds. And don't forget your folds for your trenches here. Alright, so you can see nice and flat, stands up nicely, then you've got your steps. So that's the easiest way I've determined anyways for how to kind of make the determinations as to where to put my score lines in for each of these steps and each of the little trenches on my stair steps. And knowing this, I can just apply that to whatever final card size I want. I can change it up and put, for example, this is a 5x7 card, and I've put the steps on the left side as opposed to the right side, but it uses the exact same sort of math to figure out where to score or how to score your steps. It's a little bit of a mystery to me until I really sat down to think about it, but then once I thought about it, it really made sense. And the first one was a little bit harder, but it definitely gets easier the more cards that you make. And now that I know how to make these cards, I'll definitely be doing it more, because it's kind of nice to kind of create a card that will stand up nice and proud. And I think that especially for the holiday season and Christmas, a lot of people do like to put their cards on display, so it's nice to kind of have something a little bit different than just, your standard card, because you get all these different levels and different layers to play with and decorate and add to, and it's also a different overall shape too, so it's just something that I think, will make your card stand out a little bit more amongst a store-bought card. So it is something that's a little bit extra special, and you can definitely play with these steps and have them land wherever you really want to. There's some limits, of course, but for the most part, you can just do the math to kind of figure out what works, what looks good. And if nothing else, just make a template out of just plain copy paper, and try it out first there instead of your nice cardstock. And once you feel comfortable, then you can kind of apply that to your card bases. So hopefully, if you were always curious about how to create one of these, hopefully that sort of demystifies the math. And like I said, there's probably a lot of different ways to do this, but this is just one way, and if you know of other ways, definitely, especially if you know of a lot of easier ways, drop me a comment, because I always do want to make my life easier. So I'm always eager to learn better, faster, or just, easier methods. But for now, this is how I'll be making my stepper cards. Thanks so much for joining me. Until my next video, have a fantastic day. Bye.